Welcome to PRICOM Design. My name is Bob Scheffler. We're very excited about our new layout lighting solution. The layout lighting solution, we believe, fills the need for model railroaders that have not had an animation solution for the lighting. We spend a lot of time creating great visual models, and then we stick them under some fluorescent lights. And one of the problems with that is the world isn't always on, it isn't always noon, high noon on your layout. So one of the things that we focused on was the ability to create more of a mood using the lighting. So what we're going to talk about today is a general overview of what's included in the layout lighting solution, how to connect the layout lighting solution, as well as some of the optional pieces you can get from us or from other vendors. To start with, we have our main board. This is our layout lighting solution main board. We're going to talk about that in a couple minutes. And it is programmed using a web browser. So such as my laptop over here, I've got a web browser connected to my layout lighting board. The layout lighting board can also connect to a lot of accessory devices using the PRICOM network, or PNet. What PNet allows you to do is simply connect additional boards, and we're going to show you some of those today. So let's have a look at some of the pieces that are included with your layout lighting solution, as well as some of the pieces that are included in the starter kit. We do have a complete starter kit to kind of get you going really fast. And then we're going to talk a little bit about some of the additional things that you can add to your system. So on my table here, on the white, I've actually got what we call the starter kit. Starter kit includes everything you see here. It includes everything that you're going to need to get going pretty quickly. We'll shoot another video for you to actually go through every step of how to connect this all together. Everything is described in the user manual, which is available from the website. This goes through pretty much how to connect the starter kit. Starter kit really includes our layout lighting main board. This board has several connections that we're going to talk about in a minute. It also includes 2 of our DC power controllers. These are very useful for connecting to red, green, and blue LEDs. We do include in the starter kit 2 1-meter strips of red, green, blue LED, as well as 2 1-meter strips of white-only LEDs. This allows you to go red, green, blue, and white across 2 full meters on 2 separate control boards. We also include this opto input trigger board. What this is great for is for push buttons or other sensors that you want to put on your track, such as block occupancy, etc. There's a Ethernet cable to connect your layout lighting board to your home router or your home gateway. Since it is programmed through a web browser, you will need to connect it to your home network. Then we also include the PNet cables necessary to connect everything together, and the appropriate power supplies. We're using 12-volt DC power supplies. These 12-volt power supplies this one's a 1 amp supply for the main board, and these are 2 amp supplies suitable for the DC power controllers. Some of the other options that you can get, actually starting back here, we do make a block occupancy detector. This block occupancy detector has 4 current sensing transformers. These work on DCC. Really won't do you much good for a DC layout, but on DCC, and has the PNet connections, PRICOM network, that'll allow it to connect all together into one system. That's the block occupancy detector. Of course, you can add more of these DC power controllers, and each one of these DC power controllers has 4 outputs. Each of those outputs can handle up to 8 amps. We've included automatically resetting circuit breakers, so if you happen to overload it, those circuit breakers will trip and turn on automatically. You can run as many of these boards off of one layout lighting system as you wish. You can go up to 64 dimmers, 64 individual channels. Multiple boards could be set for the same channel if you need more current, more light. So those are our DC power controllers. We also have a lower current output. This one is actually, we call it the output board. And this one has the same 4 channels as the DC controller, except this board really only is meant for about 400 to 500 milliamps or half amp per output as opposed to 8 amps. And then we're also quite excited about this. This is a LocoNet to PRICOM network bridge board. What that allows you to do is take a Digitrax system and read the fast clock from the LocoNet, and then send the fast clock back to the layout lighting board. And the reason you'd ever want to do that is if you want to have sunset on your layout, say at 6:30 p.m., it's quite easy to set up the layout lighting board to run a whole sequence of fades at a certain time of day based on fast clock. Now, of course, you can use more than just the LEDs we include in the starter kit. You can buy from us 1 meter cables. These are 1 meter strips. These have double face tape on the back and are red, green, and blue. So you can buy those by the meter, or we also have the full reels. This is 5 meters long. This reel is the white LEDs. So we got a couple of reels of those. And we've also got the red, green, blue LEDs. So you can buy these from us as 5 meter full lengths. You can also buy them as 1 meter cut strips. These 1 meter cut strips, we solder the tails on there for you, already labeled with a red, green, blue wire. So it's quite convenient to wire up for you. So all these different options. As far as the outputs of the DC power controller, since these handle about 8 amps, actually they handle 8 amps per output, we found the LED strips generally draw about 1 amp per meter, which means you can drive roughly 8 meters of red, green, blue, white from one of these boards. So if you're doing your calculation of how many of these boards might I need, figure, for every 8 meters of LED tape, you're going to need one of these driver boards. The way we've set up our layout, we actually use more individual controls. So we never really have a place where you use a full even 5 meters on one of those controllers. That gives us a lot more granular control. The whole idea being we want to create a rolling sunset. Ideally on your layout at 6:30 p.m., for example, you could have one side of the layout start to fade into twilight or into dusk. And then as it moves across the layout, as time moves across the layout, the lighting is also moving along with the time. So that's pretty cool. And one of the other things is the PRICOM network, the PNet, is also compatible with our Dream Player Professional, Dream Player Pro. And this allows you to do something else, which is as you have that rolling sunset going across your layout, you can change from birds singing during the day to, say, crickets during the evening, or say 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. You could actually have the coyotes start howling just for some fun. So different ways to bring all these different pieces together into one complete lighting and layout animation solution. So let's do a little walkthrough of each of the boards in the starter kit, as well as some of the accessory boards that you can buy from us. Let's start with the main board. On this main board, we have several interfaces as well as terminal strips. You can see kind of one of the things that jumps right at you is this big silver guy right here. This is actually the Ethernet jack. This is what's going to connect to your home network, and that's what allows you to access this board from your web browser, your tablet, even a smartphone. That's what this jack is here. The two black jacks right here, these are for your PRICOM network, your PNet. This is how everything is going to communicate between the different modules. Continuing around the board, this 2-position terminal strip up here is the power input. The power input, we like to use 12 volts DC. It can accept a little bit wider range of power. 12 volts DC is probably the best to use because that 12 volts is also going to go out on the PNet cables to power some of the things like the block occupancy detectors. This terminal strip, the next one here, is actually our control outputs. This allows you to hook up some local LEDs or some local relays or something like that if you wanted to turn on or off any given load. Of course, you can have a lot more than just these 4 outputs here. You could actually have lots of things connected on your PNet. What I've used these for mainly is a main switch panel in the layout room, with a little plate with 4 buttons on it, and the 4 buttons have LEDs, and then I drive the LEDs with these outputs, and we'll talk about that in another video. The next terminal strip over here is trigger inputs. These are not optically isolated. These are directly connected to the processor, and so what these are really meant for is for push buttons. 4 push buttons can connect directly to the ground pin, so there's 4 inputs and a ground. This is very handy for that same layout room control panel, light control panel. Just basically, I set mine up for day mode as 1 button, night mode as the 2nd button, cleaning mode as the 3rd button, and then off as the 4th button. So when I walk out of the layout room, I can hit the off button and shut everything down. The next terminal strip on this side over here is actually our DMX512 output. One of the key features of our layout lighting solution is the ability to not only control the PNET dimmers, the DC dimmers driving LEDs, but also the ability to drive DMX512. DMX512 is a theater lighting protocol, and it allows you to use a disc jockey style of dimmer packs, actually programmable lights. There's a lot of things you can do with this. And so our solution actually integrates not only DC controllers with the PNET, but also DMX512 dimmers, and we'll talk about that as well. Next down here is actually a DCC input. The DCC input allows you to trigger different events off of a DCC event. So for example, if I wanted to throw accessory 1, 2, 3, 4, that accessory 1, 2, 3, 4 command could actually be an instruction to start a sequence of lighting effects. So you might want to have a lightning storm or something like that that only you know the address for, and that is read through this DCC input. So we're listening to everything. It doesn't have a specific address. It's actually listening to all DCC information. Along the bottom is a dip switch. At this point, none of these switches actually do anything at the moment. We've reserved them for future software updates, but this is mode switches. In the future will do something useful. This push button here is used to load the firmware when you want to update your firmware. And then probably one of the more important things is this SD card. This micro SD card actually contains all of the firmware as well as the configuration parameters. So your presets and your scenes and sequences, and we're going to talk about that as well in another video. So basically that's a quick overview of the board. We do have a couple of status lights. Down here on the bottom right side we have a 3.3 and 5 volt power indicators, and then down here on the left side we have some status LEDs, LA, LB, LC. These status LEDs are overviewed in the manual. It'll tell you a little bit more about what these mean. They mean different things at different times depending on what you're doing. So that's a quick overview of the actual layout lighting solution main board. Now I'm going to then go on to our DC power controller. The DC power controller is really cool because this is not only a switch, but it's also a dimmer. And we wanted to create something that could create really beautiful fades on these LED strip lights. And we wanted to use the LED strip lights because they're very low power, they don't generate a lot of heat, and they're really nice for sticking in very small places on your layout. So on our DC power controller, we've got the, for us, a standard 2 modular jacks. These are 6-wire modular jacks, the PNET jacks, PRICOM network. You can use any of the flat cable like you'd have for any of the bus cables that you'd have at home or to build on your layout. They are 6-wire straight through modular cables. So those are our 2 PNET jacks. Along the top we've got actually 2 ground terminals and then 2 power terminals. This is really handy for daisy chaining if you want to connect 2 of these boards together and then run power from into one board and then out of that board to the next board. So it's very convenient to have those extra terminal strip positions there. And then our outputs over here, these are 4 outputs for our LED strips. So we have 4 outputs plus 2 power sources. Those 2 power sources are coming directly from the power terminal strip, which means effectively 12 volts goes in, 12 volts comes right back out. So that's what these are for. On the right side, we've got our mode switches. This is really important on these PNET power controllers because the slot number is what tells the DC power controller what dimmer numbers they are. In this case, I've got all the switches off. The slots are described in both the quick start for this board as well as in the layout lighting user manual. But the first 4 switches, switch 1 through 4, are your switches for setting your slot number. Right now we're set all off, so that's slot 0. Slot 0 would mean that this is dimmer 1, 2, 3, and 4. Slot 1, if I just turn that switch on, slot 1 would be dimmer 5, 6, 7, and 8. So that's what those are for. Switch number 8 is important as well because switch 8 selects whether it's in dimmer mode or it's in non-dim mode. Right now switch 8 is on, and so that means it's in dimmer mode. And what that means is I can control the light output from these LED strips very easily. If I switch 8 off, then I basically got 8 amp turn on, turn off type of switches used in these outputs. Similar to the other boards, the push button loads the firmware, and so I can just push this button and it'll actually reload the firmware, and we'll talk about that when we set up our system. And then there's 4 LED indicators to show you the current status of the 4 outputs. So that's our DC power controller board. Next, we'll talk about this opto input board. This is our input board that allows you to hook up pretty much any kind of trigger source. It is optically isolated, which means you can use a DCC stationary decoder or a mobile decoder or push buttons or anything to trigger it, and you don't have to worry about any ground tying together with that. Just like in the other boards, it's got the slot positions with these 8 dip switches over on the side. Same slot numbering. This is slot 0 right now. I could flip number 1 on, that would be slot 1. Across the top, we've got the input terminal strip for the optical isolators. We call these the trigger inputs. We do provide a convenience 5-volt power supply coming out here, so that if you want to just use push buttons, you can hook 5 volts directly up to the opto isolators. This is talked about or discussed in the manual for this board, as well as the layout lighting solution manual. And then our 2 P-net jacks over on the side. This board, as most of the boards have, 4 status indicators across the bottom telling you the current state of those 4 trigger inputs. This board's really handy for push buttons. It's also handy for block occupancies. I tend to have them around the shop wired like this with some push buttons on it. I just took a piece of acrylic and bolted it on there and wired some buttons so they're convenient. And you'll get to see some of these in action in the next video. On the Dream Player Pro, that's covered elsewhere, but Dream Player Pro, that's what you're going to want to use your P-net jacks for. So those P-net jacks actually become important on a Dream Player. On the Dream Player, then the same 4 dip switches select the slots. Talking about the LocoNet bridge, the LocoNet bridge is really key for receiving fast clock. That's all we're doing with it right now. We can do more in the future, but right now all we're doing is receiving fast clock. On this board, we've got our standard 2 P-net jacks. This board also has a DCC input on it. The DCC input on this board is optically isolated, so if you want to receive DCC commands, this one's optically isolated. The DCC input on the layout lighting main board is not optically isolated, so you're going to want to watch out for grounding with that one. Please see the user manual about how to connect that. It's important to connect the ground to the system ground. Then on the top, we've got a LocoNet jack. So please don't confuse the 2 P-net jacks from the LocoNet jack. They are all 6-wire modular connectors, but the P-net jacks are a pair, as they are on all of our products. They're in pairs. The LocoNet jack is a single. This LocoNet jack is optically isolated from the rest of the board. Because of that, it does draw about 30 milliamps off of the LocoNet rail sync lines in order to power the local detection section and also to power the optical isolators. At this point, the dip switch doesn't do anything on this board either. We'll probably set this up so that different types of LocoNet commands are sent back to P-net depending on which switch is turned on. Right now, we're sending only fast clock information. If this board does not receive a fast clock update in about 1 minute, it will actually query the LocoNet for a fast clock time. So you don't have to worry about having your fast clock constantly updating. This will query the LocoNet for fast clock. Across the bottom, we've got a set of 5 LEDs. These LEDs show status as well as traffic really on the LocoNet, on the DCC input, and on the P-net side. So typical of what you'll see is a receive or RX on the LocoNet, and then that'll immediately turn into a transmit on the P-net side, and that would be this board receiving the fast clock update and then sending it back out P-net. So that's the LocoNet bridge board. The last board I'm going to talk about is the block occupancy detector. This uses transformers. It has the same slot number setup as the other boards. It's got 2 P-net jacks, so pretty much you recognize all the same pieces on all these boards. And similarly to the others, you can update the firmware by pushing this push button. These current sensing transformers, as I said before, really are only appropriate for DCC. They're not going to do much for you on DC power. They can range from a 10 k ohm resistor, so very, very low load for a resistor wheel set on a car, on a train car, and they'll go up to about 10 amps, meaning I can sense block occupancy anywhere from 10 k ohm resistor all the way up to 10 amp load. And one of the things we spend a lot of time, because there is a processor on here, we've actually got some really intelligent algorithms to mask out any current from adjacent transformers. So typical of a multi-sensor like this is if you put a 10 amp load on one transformer or sense a 10 amp load through one transformer, you'll see a phantom detection on an adjacent block. And we go through a lot of trouble to make sure that that doesn't happen to you. It'll actually detect, if you put a 10 amp load on two blocks like 1 and 3, and then a 10 k ohm load right in the middle, it'll actually detect that just fine. So we do a lot of debouncing in our algorithm on the processor. And then that comes out as PNet commands out on the PNet. So with the layout lighting mainboard, I could actually say, wait for a trigger on block occupancy 3. And if I see a trigger on block occupancy 3, then start a lighting sequence. And the lighting sequence could include sound, so as well as triggering multiple Dream Player Pros. So that's kind of an overview of all the pieces that go in here. They're all connected using the 6-wire modular cables, as I talked about. And the starter kit includes the power supplies to get you going. One last thought on the PNet, the PRICOM network, is it does require termination. This is also discussed in the manual. We supply some resistor terminators with the system. It's best to put those at the end of the bus, one at each end. They're roughly 120 ohms, so you can put these at the end. We tend to ship the layout lighting board with one inserted in one of the jacks so that you don't forget to put one in. You can get those out easily with push the tab up and pop it out with the screwdriver. So that's what those are about. So hopefully that gives you a good idea of what's included in the layout lighting system, a little bit of an overview of some of the boards that you can use with it. We'll be continuing to shoot videos for you so you can understand a little more about what we're doing. The next video that you should watch if you're interested is our assembly of the starter kit. We'll do a video that actually goes through step by step exactly how to connect all the transformers, how to connect the boards and plug them all together, and we'll get them all going for you. So thanks for watching. Hopefully that gives you some ideas about what you can do and what's included in the system. We'll do a little bit more video with our demo layout in the back to show you some rolling sequences, rolling sunsets, as well as some house lighting as well, lighting up your structures. You can light your structures with the system as well. All programmed from your web browser, very flexible. You do not require a computer. All of the configuration information is stored on the SD card on the board, which means you can turn this board off, turn the board on, and it'll start whether your computer is attached, whether a browser is attached or not. It automatically starts. So thanks for watching and have a good day.